contemporary poetry for each day of the school year. So please come to the stage, Rita Dove and Billy Collins. Here we are, dear.
I am going to start off. First of all, it is thrilling to see all of you here. The energy really is palpable in the room because you are people who know that language is important and that how you say something is perhaps 10 times, maybe 1,000 times more important than what the meaning you put behind it. But I'm going to talk fast. I have 5 minutes, and then we're going to do some questions. I was thinking about what happened when I was poet laureate, and I received so many letters from students your age, and they always began with, "I don't know much about poetry," or, "Well, I'm not really an expert on poetry, but," and then after that little word "but" came some of the most incredible descriptions of how poetry had moved them, how what it meant to them, and how important it was to the world. One mother of 3 wrote me, she was despairing because her daughter wanted to be a poet and she didn't know how she was going to make a living. But she then said, "I understand now that poetry is making the language your own." And I've carried that with me ever since, because I think one of the most important things I can say to you today is that only you can tell the story that you experience and that you live. Only you have that story. And in terms of trying to find your voice in a certain way will find you. If you remain true to the experiences that you see, if you remain true to the idea that maybe your first draft expresses your heart, but it's not getting across to anyone else, and then you have to use your tools, which is language, which is silence, which is the way a word can sound ugly or prickly just by its very sound, to find the right word. If you can get into the joy of rewriting so that someone else can feel your heart and your story, then you've got a Made in the Shade. It's the most exhilarating feeling in the world, and I too hate those first drafts. They are, a mess. But to remember that once you get past that first draft, there's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful sense of making it just right. The very first book that I remember was a book, it didn't have very many words at all. It was called Harold, Harold and the Purple Crayon. Oh. It was a fabulous book because there was this little boy who had a purple crayon. His mother put him to bed, and then he decided he wanted to take a walk, so he drew a window with his purple crayon, and he climbed out the window, and he drew his own path, and he, drew his own boat, and when he sailed across an ocean, and he ate 9 different kinds of pie. I remember that. In a way, that was my first, I think, meeting with metaphor, because that's really a symbol for the imagination, isn't it? I mean, you write, and you write on the wave of your own writing. It will lead you. And as you go through the revision process and things begin to click into place, you'll discover all of those people who are with you on that path. So to remember, first of all, you have your story to tell, your voice, be brave. As the First Lady said, it is a very scary enterprise, but it's an exhilarating one. And follow the purple path.
Well, thank you, Rita. I can do a lot of things in 5 minutes, but teaching a workshop is probably not one of them. I can make a bed in 5 minutes, but it's not a very well-made bed. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, I know there are a lot of adults here, but I want to talk mostly to the students here and just give them a little advice about my experience in writing. One of the phrases that you run into if you take a writing workshop or is finding your voice. And it's true enough that if one is lucky, someone said everyone's born with about 300 bad poems in them at birth, and the only way to get rid of them is just to write them out till you get to the good stuff. So there's always that period, and you shouldn't worry about whether you're good now. You're probably not that good, but you'll get better. There is hope. And it's true that finding your voice, you can get to a point as you're writing where you feel that you're writing like no one else. Seamus Heaney has his famous poem called Digging, and it's one of the earliest poems he wrote. And he said after he wrote that poem, he read it back, and he said, for better or worse, no one else could have written that poem. He knew that was his poem. Not that it was great, he wouldn't be that immodest, but there is that point you get to. But what I don't like about the expression finding your voice is that it's very mystifying, I think, in the minds of young people. It makes you feel, it made me feel when I first heard it, that your voice is tied up with your authenticity, that your voice lies deep within you at some root bottom of your soul, and that to find your voice, you need to fall into deep introspection. Like figuring out if you're one of the elect or not. You have to gaze deeply into yourself. And the frustration or the anxiety is that maybe you won't find anything there. And then you're on this terrible quest to nowhere. Let me reassure, which sometimes works out, but let me reassure you that it's not that mysterious. Your voice has an external source. It is not lying within you. It is lying in other people's poetry. It is lying on the shelves of the library. To find your voice, you need to read deeply. You need to look inside yourself, of course, for material, and because poetry is something that honors subjectivity. It honors your interiority. It honors what's inside. But to find a way to express that, you have to look outside yourself, read widely, read all the poetry you can get your hands on. And in your reading, you're searching for something. Not so much your voice, you're searching for poets that make you jealous. Professors of writing call this literary influence. It's jealousy. And it's with every art, whether you play the saxophone or do charcoal drawings. You're looking to get influenced by people who make you furiously jealous. So I say read widely, find poets that make you envious, and then copy them. Try to get like them. Say, you read a great poem in a magazine somewhere, and you just can't stand the fact that you didn't write it. Well, what do? Well, you can't get white out and just put, blank out the poet's name and write yours in. That's not fair. But you can say, okay, I didn't write that poem. Let me write a poem like that is sort of my version of that. And that's basically the way you grow. Okay, that's point one. The other point is, don't forget that poetry is play. Poetry is play, because we often take ourselves, of course we take ourselves seriously, but poetry is not only a place to take yourself more seriously than you take yourself in normal life. It's a place to have fun with language. It's a place to play. Kenneth Koch was asked, lovely poet, was asked, what's the difference between prose and poetry? And he gave a kind of illustrative example. He said, here's prose. No dogs allowed on the beach. That's prose. Here's poetry. No dogs or logs allowed on the beach. No poodle, however trim. No dachshund unable to swim. Why is that poetry? Well, it's funny for one thing, but also it seems that the language is enjoying itself. The words seem to be aware of the words around them, and that self-consciousness seems to be a chorus or a plot designed to fill you with joy and pleasure. I think that's 5 minutes. I don't know, but we would love to hear some questions from you, and then we can extend this for maybe another 5 minutes or 2 minutes.
Thank you. So a question right here.
I was just
Why don't you stand up, please?
Oh, sure.
Keep wondering.
Yeah, I will. How do you find or approach the balance between the need to convey your own story and the need to convey your experience to someone else?
You know, I always think of Hemingway. He said that the first draft of his novel was entirely for him, and the second was a compromise, and the third was entirely for the audience. It was entirely for his readers. There's a point, I think, when you're writing, there is that interiority. You want to get that feeling out, that story out, but there's also a point where you want to reach out and touch somebody else and say, I want you to understand this. And it's not so much finding a balance as it is a trajectory. You know, there's a point where you will not be satisfied with just writing it for yourself, but you want someone else to hear it and understand it too. So you keep working on